us today. Today is March 21st. Imagine building a business around fragrance products and then suddenly losing your sense of smell. For many people, that might feel like the end. But for today's guest, it became the beginning of something new. Today, we are talking about reinvention, resilience, and what happens when life forces you to rethink everything. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome, welcome. Welcome to our Breaking Through Community and Conversations. Thank you so much for being here today. I am Marian Amwa, coach and author of Breaking Through the Immigrant's Handbook for Thriving in the American Workplace. This is the book. This is the book. In this community, we share real stories, practical wisdom, and honest conversations to help you thrive at work and in life. Well, I have with me a beautiful lady, a beautiful woman, and I'm excited to welcome Abba Williams. Abba is a chemist and an entrepreneur whose journey spans science, development work in parts of Africa, around the world. From Ghana, she migrated from Ghana to the United States and now building a fragrance-free, building a health, wellness, fragrance. She will tell you more about it. Her story is one of resilience, reinvention, and discovering purpose through unexpected challenges. Abba, welcome to Breaking Through Conversations. If you're joining us for the very first time or you've joined us before, please put in the chat where you are joining us from. Say hello to Abba and tell us how you are doing. And so, Abba, welcome again. Take us back. Who are you? What do you do today? And what's one thing about you people wouldn't expect?
Okay. Thank you so much, Marian, for the warm welcome and for this opportunity. And hello, everyone who has joined us on this discussion this morning. My name is Abba Williams, as Marian said. Other people know me as Abba Say. That was my maiden name. I used to be Abba Say. I got married and now I'm Abba Williams. I'm Ghanaian. I'm from Ghana in West Africa. I'm living in the US at the moment in Virginia with my husband. To talk about myself, I come from a family of 5 siblings. I'm the second born of 5 siblings. I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. My parents were both educators. My father was a lecturer at the University of Ghana in University of Ghana, Legon. My mother also taught English in a high school in Ghana.
Okay.
So my background is education, but I ended up, somewhere else. I went into the science field. I studied the physical sciences. There was physics, chemistry, math. And I went to the university, continued with science, and graduated in chemistry.
Yeah.
And later on, I studied food science. And then I ended up in development. I also studied agribusiness for development. So I'll say, in terms of training, I describe myself as a scientist, as a chemist. But when it came to work, I started working in a lab, doing lab analysis. And then life took me out of the lab into the field. So I also worked in the area of research on financial services. And then I found myself working with a US Peace Corps, which I did for a couple of years. And then I got into the not-for-profit area, and I worked with Care International in Ghana and in Tanzania. And I also worked with another organization called ACDI VOCA. The general area was development, with business, with education, with health, but my focus was more in, natural resources, agribusiness kind of area. So that's what I did for several years. And then somewhere along the line, I developed an interest in aromatherapy, in natural perfumery, and then I started making body care products. And that all ended up with me establishing a business that was looking at wellness, but the connection between fragrance and wellness. And that business right now is Akiba Fragrance and Wellness Studio. And I make products to keep your body smooth, moisturize your body. And I also make products for keeping your home smelling good. So that's kind of, the short form of the story. Now, you asked something people may not know.
Fun
Uh,
fact.
yes, a fun fact, a fun fact. When I think I must have been 6 or 7 years old, which means I was in Ghana, we call it, I think, class two. Here in the US, I'm not quite sure what grade it is, but I was 6 or 7 years old at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this idea to do mathematics or arithmetic with alphabets, A, B, C, D. I don't know where that came from, but I took each alphabet and I gave it a number. So I said you could do arithmetic with, alphabets. And I had told my teacher at the time that I wanted to teach the class because I'd figured out this way to do math with alphabets. I don't think it ever happened. I don't remember ever actually doing that. But I remember on at least 2 occasions, I was telling my class teacher that I wanted to teach the class how to do arithmetic using alphabets. So yes. So that was way back. My 6-year-old mind thought it was a great thing to do. So that's one fun fact that I'd like to share.
Oh, okay. But when you were telling this story, I thought it was going to end up, I figured it out and it worked out. It did
No,
not.
you try things. Some of them end up with something concrete. Some of them kind of fizzle out. This one of the ones that didn't actually happen. But now looking back, I'm like, what was I thinking? Doing additions with A, B. So let's say A is one and B is two. Then A plus B will be C.
Three.
Now,
Yeah.
yes, three. That's the way, I was thinking about it. Simple 6-year-old mind. Now if I was going to do it again, I'd probably do something different.
No, somebody can take this idea and run with it. I'm telling you, that's innovative. That is creative, you know. And I'm glad your class two teacher didn't say don't do that. Uh, Challenge the status quo and do something. That is how innovations are born. But thank you for sharing that. But you're a scientist, you were born in education. Let me just say hello. There's hello in the chat. Joining from Tema, Ghana. The person is AC.
Thank you, my
Hello
sister.
from Maryland. Joining from Tema as well. There's somebody else. Hello from Canada. Wow, you reinvented algebra in class two. I have to move my questions, my comments so that I can see the name. But welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you. Okay, so Abba, basically, if you were to sum up who you are, you're a scientist, a chemist for that. Yeah, okay. You began your journey in science and chemistry, as you've told all of us. When you look back, what first sparked your curiosity about science and understanding how things work, given that you grew up in a family of educators, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, it's difficult to pinpoint a particular moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could say maybe, when I was trying to figure out ABC arithmetic, maybe that was it. But consciously, I don't think of it as there being a specific time when my curiosity in science was sparked. But what I do remember is that up till about age 11, 12,
Mm-hmm.
you know, math and arithmetic was a bit difficult. I managed to get along, through school,
Mm-hmm.
but it was still a bit of a mystery to me. And somehow, when I was 11 in Ghana, that would be class seven, but around 11 years old, suddenly it looked like something clicked
Mm-hmm.
and I could figure out math, much better. And
Mm-hmm.
then I went to high school, and in my third year of high school, something happened again. And I think it had to do with the teacher that we had at the time. Unfortunately, I can't remember his name, but he taught in a way that suddenly it just made sense. And I
Wow.
grew to love mathematics in particular, and then I carried it through right up to, to the end of high school. In university, I didn't do math, but suddenly math made sense,
Mm,
and in those days, if you did well in a subject, you were encouraged to continue with it, So I was doing, things like English, French, history, and I was also doing chemistry, physics, biology. But in school, if you did well in those subjects, you were kind of shepherded in that direction. So I kind of just followed the path. I was doing well in science, and so I just continued with it. So that's kind of my, story of science. I don't remember it as being a deliberate choice,
mm,
but it was something I was doing okay in, and so I just decided to take it forth. Later in life,
mhm.
things change, and I'll talk about that later in this discussion.
Wow. That thing about so age 11 something happened in high school, a
Yes,
teacher.
yes,
My hearts go off to teachers. Thank you for what you do. He was a good teacher, or he or she was a good teacher, and that is something for you. That is really powerful. Okay. So now you're on that path of being a scientist,
yes.
right? And your career, I want you to talk a little bit about so you did science and then you go into college and you decide to pursue science as well. Can you
Yes.
tell us that
About
transformation or that, yeah, that
yes,
transformation, that
yes.
or that transition, that's the word I'm
All
looking
right.
for.
Yes.
Hmm.
So, like I said, I got into the science track, and high school, I took physics, chemistry, and math. Now, I mentioned earlier on that with science, it's kind of if you're doing well in science, it was just assumed that you would continue. What I did find while studying science was I didn't like biology. For some reason, I didn't enjoy biology. I had to study it, and so I did. But I found out that I was more comfortable with quantitative
Hmm.
subjects.
Hmm.
So things where you are adding up, analyzing something, drawing lines and that kind of thing. That was more enjoyable for me. So I studied physics, chemistry, and maths.
That's okay.
Then I had to make a choice for going to the university. And I'm sure you know, and maybe those in the audience who are Ghanaian will also know that the thing was your child, you wanted them to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer,
Engineer.
that. Exactly. So my parents had wanted me to do medicine.
Hmm.
And I told you I didn't like biology. I didn't
Mhm.
like blood. I didn't like,
Mhm.
cutting things and that kind of stuff. So I think I could have done it if I wanted to, but I I just couldn't see myself in a medical field. And
Mhm.
so I didn't even apply to medical school. Now,
Mhm.
I later on found out from some friends that somehow I was on the list. If you're going to medical school, you have to go for an interview and then they decide whether you get in or not. And someone told me I was on the list. That's no, I didn't apply to medical school. So I think my dad in particular, I think, was disappointed that I didn't go in for medicine, but I knew that wasn't for
It was
me.
not for me.
So when I came
Stop,
to
stop right there, Abba. Stop right there. So talk to the parents. Talk to the parents, talk to the adults in here who are maybe guiding, who have mentees, right? Our mentality, especially immigrants, if you're an immigrant, doctor, engineer, lawyer, please talk to them. Talk to them a minute and then continue your story.
I think that it's a good thing for a parent to have aspirations for your child. Parents they have experience behind them, so they kind of might be able to see certain things in terms of careers that would be useful or good for a child. But at the same time, the child or the person you are mentoring also has their own interests. And the fact that you are good at something doesn't necessarily mean that is what you should do. You should be good and you should also have that interest. So I think that it shouldn't be a force, that you have to do this. It should be a discussion with
Discussion.
that child or whoever you are mentoring, and you can explain why you think these careers would be good for them, but allow them also to share, and have an input into that.
Yeah.
Because I know of people who have had pressure from parents to go down a particular career path, and in the future, you find out that they change, they go and then they end up doing something else, or they don't do so well. But there are also cases where people are like, oh, I'm glad my father or my mother made me do this, because
Exactly.
you realize that that was the right thing to do.
Exactly.
When I was in primary school, going to high school, I actually wanted to go to Achimota
Mm.
because
Mm.
friends of mine were going there. My dad said, no, you're going to Wesley Girls.
Mhm.
Wesley Girls is a high school in Ghana. And
Yes.
so I went to Wesley Girls, and I'm glad that I did.
Did, yeah.
So I think there's always this balancing
Like
act.
the
Yes,
balance.
but it
Yeah.
should be a discussion. And of course, a parent wants what is best for their child.
Yes.
But sometimes what is best for the child may not be the particular career you have in
Yeah.
mind.
Yes. Okay. So someone has put in, I think Rachel says, Abba could have done anything in caps. But go ahead, Abba, tell us. So you are now making a choice at the
The
university. Tell
university,
us, yeah.
yes. So medicine wasn't an option, and I didn't know what the other option would be. What can I do with chemistry, physics, and math? So I said, well, I want to do an applied science. I don't want to just study physics, chemistry, and math. And I looked around, and the area that appealed to me was chemical engineering. So really, I've always wanted to be a chemical engineer. If you would want to talk about what was my dream job or career, it would have been chemical engineering. I'd wanted to go to a university in Ghana that had that subject, and that was the University of Science and Technology in Kumasi. Yes, I told you my parents wanted me to do medicine. So it's another story altogether, but something happened and I wasn't able to get the application form
Mhm.
for that particular university. So it didn't happen. If it had, I might have ended up in the University of Science and Technology. So in Legon, which is the university I finally attended, um, there wasn't really anything there that appealed to me. But it's like you finished high school, you're going to go to university. And so I said, well, I'll do physics, I'll do chemistry, but I didn't want to do math. I loved math, but I didn't want to do math in the university. And eventually I said, well, I'll go and do biochemistry because it was kind of an applied science. Now, this is someone who didn't do biology in sixth form in high school, and I was coming to university, and now I said I'm going to do biochemistry because it was applied. So even though I hadn't done biology in high school, I registered to do botany and zoology at the university. And so I did physics, chemistry, botany, and zoology just so that I could get into the biochemistry track because I felt that was something applied. And if I couldn't do chemical engineering,
Yeah.
I'll do I'll do biochemistry. And I think when I decided to do that, my father was happy because I think in his mind, all right, she's moving towards the medical field. If she does biochemistry, she might move into that area. So that's what I studied in the university. I studied physics, chemistry, botany, and zoology. But in my final year, I focused on chemistry.
Chemistry.
Yes. So the degree that I had was chemistry with biochemistry.
Okay, great, great. So now I know that you've talked about how your career moved from this laboratory science into development work, finance sector, and all that. Program management in Ghana, Tanzania. You've worked with international organizations, you've worked with Peace Corps. Now, can you tell us how those experiences, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your movements,
Yes.
right? And tell us how those experiences have shaped how you think about solving real world problems. So walk us through your journey
All
and
right.
how it has shaped you.
Well, I finished, like I said, I graduated in chemistry. And then in Ghana at the time, we had this 1 year program called the National Service.
Okay.
Now, sometimes in the 70s, something had happened and the universities had to be closed for a year. So when the students came back, everybody had lost 1 year. And to make up for that gap, there was this program called the National Service. So after you finished high school, you will do 1 year, they post you somewhere to work. And then after you finished your first degree, you'd also work for 1 year. So after my first degree, I worked for 1 year in the chemistry department at the university, and I was helping with preparing, solutions for chemistry experiments and the like. During that time, I'd started thinking of what I wanted to do next. And I still wanted to get into chemical engineering. So I'd applied to some schools, and I didn't get admission, unfortunately. I happened to be talking to someone, also a lecturer at the University of um, Ghana, and he recommended that I talk to another lecturer in the food science department. Some people here might know him, is Professor Samuel Safadidi. So I spoke to him, and he encouraged me to come and do a master's program in food science. So I said, well, I had time on my hands, so I studied food science. So once I graduated, um, in food science, I started to work with Professor Sefadidi in his lab in the food science department. So that was my first job. It was a lab position. We were doing food chemistry, doing analysis. So I was mainly working with machines and doing analysis to find the components of different food ingredients and the like. So that's where my work life actually started. It was in the lab. Now, while I was doing that, another opportunity came up, which was in the Department of Agricultural Extension. That was the time, that was what took me out of the lab into the field, because that was a research project and it was looking at financial services for natural resource management. So for people who were in fishing, farming, how they finance their work. So that was the first, kind of shift. So I got into research, still in the university setting, but that took me out into the field. And it was during that, job that I visited. I think I visited, or at the time, it was 10 regions in Ghana, regions. Now there's so many more regions. But we had to go out to the field and interview farmers, fishermen, women's group, and the like. So that was one, step away from the lab. Then I got a job with the United States Peace Corps, also in Ghana. And so I was working with volunteers. It was an agroforestry project. So this time we were doing real world, work. It wasn't focused just on research. We were looking at things that would affect people's lives. So I did that for a couple of years. And then I got a job with Care International. That job took me from Accra to the Brong-Ahafo region. So our project was in Wenchi in the Brong-Ahafo region. It was also a natural resource management project. Again, we're working with people in the communities, helping them to take advantage of the resources at their disposal for their livelihoods. So I did that for, I think it was about 3 years or so. And then that project ended abruptly. Now, later in the discussion, I think that will come up again, but it ended abruptly. And I took the advantage to do some more studying. And that's when I took a course in agribusiness for development. It was a distance learning program with the University of London. So I was doing that. And then there was an opportunity to go back to care. The job that I was doing that was ended abruptly was with Care International. And so I think it was for about a year, I was just studying, but another opening came. So I got back into Care International, working at the head office in Accra. And then another opportunity came, and that was to work with Care International in Tanzania.
Okay, Abba, pause right there. So, is it that your resume was top notch? How were you getting into all these opportunities? Your background is really rich, really, really rich for a scientist, somebody who did chemistry. You've jumped around. So tell us, as you're telling the story, tell us how opportunities kept coming.
Opportunities kept coming because of people.
Okay.
It was people. Yes, it was people who were in my life, people who were in my circle. at that time, people who had my welfare at heart. So I there was a gentleman who told me to go and speak to Professor Sefadidi.
Mm-hmm.
He was one. you
Mm-hmm.
know. Then while I was working in the lab with Professor Sefadidi, there was a lady who was in the department who told me about this opportunity in the agricultural extension department.
Mm-hmm.
So it was mostly like, referrals. Yes.
Referrals.
Sometimes they say who you know matters, and some people say who knows you also matters.
Oh, I love that. Say that
Yes.
again. Who
That,
you know?
and then who knows you. So these were people who knew me and heard of opportunities and, gave me a referral or told me, Appa, this opportunity is here, think about it. So that's kind of how it happened. At each point, it's like I was going along my life. I wasn't looking for a new job. And then someone gets in touch and says, there's an opportunity here, and I'll take a look at it and maybe I'll follow along and maybe I won't. And I remember there was one gentleman, he's passed away now. Um, his name was Sam Brimer. And
Mm-hmm.
at the time I was working with care, with the Peace Corps, this opportunity came up to take up a position with with Care International, and that was going to take me out of Accra. Now here I was, I'd lived all my life in Accra. I was the kind of person that people call campus baby. They used to tease us campus baby. And then there was a phrase, it's a vernacular, they say dadaba. It's almost like, daddy's child, someone who's been
Both for child.
spoiled.
Yeah.
I don't consider myself as spoiled, but they used to call us, they say dadaba, you've lived all your life in Accra. And this would mean going out of Accra into the Brongahafo, and in Brongahafo, not even being in the capital, but going into one of the districts. So I was thinking about it and I wasn't sure, should I go for it or should I not go for it? And I spoke to Sam, and Sam said, Abba, sometimes the way to the top is through the bush. That's what he said. The way
Mm-hmm.
to the top is through the bush. And that helped me, in making the decision to follow that opportunity. Sometimes you have to go through a bit of discomfort to go forward. And so that's, just some of the examples, of people who somehow came across my path at a time when I was at a kind of crossroads and needed to make a decision. And they would speak something to me that would help me to decide in which direction to go. My move from Ghana to Tanzania was also thanks to a former boss of mine. Someone had actually offered her that opportunity, and she called me and said, Abba, there's this opening in Tanzania. Are you interested? And I told you about that story some time ago where I was trying to put in the application. I waited to the last minute trying to put in the application, and I realized I'd made a mistake, was trying to correct it, and the system just froze. And it was getting to the end of the day, time to go home. And I was like, well, listen, I'm not even really sure about it. Let me leave it and go. And then some months later, it turns out that the application actually went through. I didn't know it had gone through. And, the rest is history. I got interviewed, I was offered the job, and I went to Tanzania.
Wow. So community is not just support, it's access, it's opportunity, and
Mm.
sometimes direction.
Yes.
And when you said the way to the top is through the bush, I mean, I'm trying to put it in
Mhm.
some way. The way to the promised land is
Mhm.
through the wilderness,
Mm.
maybe.
Mm. Yes.
Abba, so this is powerful. Thank you, thank you, thank you for sharing. Definitely, you've sharing your story. Community has played a big role, and looking back, you know that without community, you will not be where you are. And so you moved to the US. You can tell us, just take us on the journey. Yeah, now you've gone to Wenchi in West Ghana. You've been in Tanzania, Accra. Now you moved to the US. What was the biggest shift you had to make personally and professionally? And maybe talk a little bit about the transition.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, well, after I'd worked in Tanzania for a couple of years, I came back to Ghana, and I got another job with it's an organization called ACDI VOCA, and they really deal in things to do with it's mainly like agribusiness, supply chains, value chains, and like it's kind of taking the whole chain from when agri product is cultivated, is
Mhm.
harvested, how it's processed, sold, and gets finally into the hand of the final consumer. And looking at that chain and how you work with the different actors along the way. So I got a job with ACDI VOCA, and that was in program monitoring and evaluation. That's what I was doing. And it's from there that I made this move to the US. But I'd like to say that I had had opportunity to visit the US a couple of times in the past. When I was doing my master's program at the university, I was doing the master's in food science. The
Mhm.
university had an exchange program with the University of California at Davis. So I got to that exchange program. So I spent a year in California doing research. So that was my first introduction to the US. If you talk about a culture shock, that was where I had it,
Mm. Mhm.
coming in, the I came from an English speaking language, English speaking country.
Country. Mhm.
America is also English
English
speaking,
speaking.
but the English is not the same. So,
Water or water.
exactly, and I remember very well, I'd gone to the shop and I wanted to buy something to eat, a sandwich. Now, the thing with the R, where in America, the emphasis on the R,
Yeah. Mhm.
and, Ghana lady, definitely not happening. And I wanted to buy a burger. And you can imagine how I hamburger. It took us, I think, 2 to 3 minutes for them to figure out what I was asking for. And the person said, "Oh, you want a burger?" And I was like, "Yes, yes, yes." I mean, that was so funny. That was so funny. But just the language and
Yeah.
being able to communicate was
Mhm.
one. And there were a lot of things. Simple things like crossing the road, going into a store. In Ghana, you want to buy milk, it's Ideal Milk.
Exactly.
That it's one brand, Ideal Milk. It's
Or
one
peak
brand.
milk.
Or Peak Milk, yes. If you're buying bread in Ghana, there's the kind of bread we call it tea bread. Another kind of bread we
Sugar
call it
bread.
butter bread, sugar bread. And I go into the store and there's this whole shelf, different types. I didn't know what to choose.
Yeah.
Milk, so many different, so everything, so much choice. It was overwhelming,
Mm.
really, really overwhelming. And
Mm.
things around how people communicate and that was where I had the big,
Yeah.
shock. And the whole time I was in the US, I was ready to come home.
Oh,
I was counting the days to when I'd finish and come home. So that was the first one. But subsequently, I visited the US again when I was with the Peace Corps. And then I had family here. My younger brother was here. So I visited. So when I finally moved in 2012, it was a softer landing for me.
okay.
I
Okay.
kind of had a sense of what to expect,
Mhm.
and so it wasn't as much of a jolt as
Yeah.
my very first visit. Now, the reason I came to the US was um, for family reasons. I got married, and my husband lived and worked in the US. I had a job in Ghana. It wasn't a bad job,
Mhm.
but when I got married, um, then there was this question: Are you going to stay in Ghana and then your husband is here and you come and go? Or are you going to come to the US? And if you come to the US, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Because I'd had exposure to the US, I kind of knew what the
Mhm.
situation might be.
Mhm.
But a funny thing happened. There was a particular week that it's like when I would do my devotion or I would hear a message somewhere, it all seemed to be saying go,
Okay.
but it was a bit of a struggle because it's like, well, then I'm leaving this, shouldn't I wait till I've got something there before I go, that kind of stuff. Then there was one morning that there was this lady who worked with me with ACDI VOCA at the time where I was working. And she just called me out of the blue one morning. And in the discussion, right now, I can't remember the word she said, but in the discussion, she pretty much said, Abba, leave this and go and join your husband.
Mm, mm,
That settled it for me. It was like you have to go. And I remember one day standing on the balcony at work, and I was telling God that, look, you gave me this job, and you also, gave me this person. That's my husband. His name is Jacob. And so if you're asking me to go, then you're going to have to take care of everything
yeah.
else. Yes, everything else. And so I informed my boss that I intended to move, and I made the move to the US. Um, the first couple of months, it was a happy time. It was like, hey, no work, I'm just relaxing, just enjoying myself, But then the thing was, what are you going to do in terms of earning an income? Because I'd been working, I didn't think I was going to be self-employed. In my mind, it's someone else is going to be
Mm-hmm.
to employ me. But I think at that time, I'd also got to the point where I wanted a change from the not-for-profit. I'd worked with NGOs for
Mm,
several years. I wanted a change, but I didn't know quite what it would be.
yeah.
So I did a couple of things. I did a bit of consulting, you know,
While
um,
in the US, right? Right now you're in the US. You've come.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So I moved to the US, and it's like, now that I'm here, what am I going to do?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I did a bit of consulting, not consulting in the US, consulting outside the
Okay.
US. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Because in the US, I came under my husband's visa. So
Yeah.
he had a work visa, I didn't. So I couldn't work in the US. So I, did bits and pieces outside.
Yeah.
And then I'd also, started doing things, like I told you, I had an interest in aromatherapy and stuff. So I was, making some body butters and things, playing around with that and trying to decide what am I going to do with my life, now that I'm here. And, I eventually established the business. That was after I got my documentation and everything. Certain things had happened that brought me to the place where I established the business. But that transition, I'll say that it was a bit easier for me because I had been to the US a couple of times before, and it was a conscious decision. So I knew what I was getting into. The part that was a bit fuzzy was, what are you going to do once you are there?
Yeah.
Yes.
So you are here sort of doing consulting here and there,
Mhm.
waiting for documentation.
Mhm.
How did you just jump into fragrance products, wellness, the
Mhm.
studio? How
Okay,
did that
how did that
transition happen?
happen?
Yes.
My interest in fragrance actually started when I was in Tanzania with
Okay.
Kemi. There was a place where I used to go and get my hair done, and
Mm-hmm.
they advertised a course in aromatherapy.
Okay.
And I read about it and I was like, oh, this sounds interesting. It's something that I like to do because I was someone who liked fragrance. I like perfumes, So when I saw that, that was of interest to me. But they didn't have enough people signing up for the course. And so it was canceled. It didn't come on. Yeah. And I was really disappointed. But my interest had been piqued so much that I said, I'm going to do it on my own. So I bought books and I read around, so kind of teaching myself about that subject area. And I visited my sister in the US, and on one occasion, I saw this product. They called it a solid lotion bar. I'd never seen anything like it. And I was like, this thing is, interesting. I'd want to see, how do you make it? And so I tried to make it myself.
Mm,
And these timelines, sometimes I have to jump back and forth to see when was when. But
mhm.
at a certain point, after I got introduced to the solid lotion bars, I was back in Ghana at a certain point, and I actually made some one Valentine's Day, and I took it to church, and a few people purchased. Now, coming back to when I was in the US, so now I'm back in the US, and a friend writes to me, was getting married, and said, could you make some of the lotion bars for
Oh,
my wedding as wedding favors? So I did that for her. I figured out a way to do it, even though I was in the US, and She wasn't, but I figured out a way to do it. And so that happened fine, didn't think much about it. Then someone wrote to me and said they had gone to a wedding. They were given this product as a favor. He had used it on his skin and it had taken care of some skin issue that he had. And I think that the lady who got married had put the name of the person who made the product in the gift. So he reached out and said, is it possible to get some more? You know, of course, at that time, I didn't really have a business or anything, but I was like, sure, I can make some for you. Then my sister called me and said someone at church had also asked her about that product that I'd made. So those two things happening in short succession made me think that, oh, maybe there's something here, So that's when I started thinking of turning this thing into a business. Now let me backtrack again.
Okay, sure.
I told you that I did a distance learning
Yes.
course in agribusiness.
Yes.
Part of it, you have to come up with a business plan for something. And at the time, I decided to make starch. In Ghana, we wear a lot of cotton and linen. And if you just use an ordinary iron, those creases are not going anywhere.
Mhm.
You need to use some starch. So my idea was creating a business around starch that you use for ironing your clothes. So I actually started making starch and selling in Ghana way back then. And I had registered a company in Ghana. It was called, at the time I called it AgriNova Enterprise. So I was doing the start. And then later on, but of course I didn't bring that with me to the US. But this was just to say that the idea of making things to sell and that kind of thing had started, sometime back. And
Yeah.
yeah, to answer your question, it was these two things that happened. This gentleman reaching out, my sister making that call. It was like, maybe you should look into starting a business. And in 2016, I registered Akiba Fragrance and Wellness Studio. Now, the reason that the name Fragrance and Wellness was, I told you I'm interested in fragrance, perfumes, and that kind of thing. And I had the idea to look at how you can use fragrance to affect, well-being. If you smell something good, it makes you feel good. So I
Mm.
wanted to make products that would do that for people. You use the products, it makes you feel good. So we had body, body butter bars. This is something that I have. It's a
Okay.
we call it a body butter bar. This is what I first saw called lotion bar.
Okay.
So it's solid. It's like a body butter that's solid, and
Rabbit.
you rub it on your skin. Yeah. So I do that, and then I talked about the fragrance stuff. I had these. I call them scented ornaments. Scented ornaments. Let me show you one. It's it's like this, so you hang it in your closet and then it will diffuse the smell over
Okay.
time. Yeah. So those are some of the things that I'm doing right now.
Right now.
Yes.
So, okay, let me just connect a few dots.
Mhm.
You decided when you went to the distance learning program,
Mhm.
you were out of a job.
When I started, I was out of a
You
job.
were out
Yes.
of the job. That
Yes.
that is key. Sometimes some things happen for us to take some steps, and then you come to the US, you come to visit your sister, you see this lotion bar. Years after, somebody asks, oh my goodness. So at this point, you realize that it's no longer a hobby,
No.
it's now a business.
Yes.
It's a business idea that has been sown
Yes.
with all the things that you have done. And that is reminding me of my friend Eunice Texan's book, When
Mhm.
Preparation Meets Opportunity.
Mhm.
So now in 2016, you have started a business
Mhm.
called Akiba Fragrance and Wellness Center, Wellness
Studio.
Studio.
Mhm.
Fragrance meaning for your body, and the
Yeah.
wellness, your home, making
Yes.
your home very
And
good.
the wellness is not limited to the home, but it's just your general well-being, because a good smell can just make you feel good, and a bad smell can make you feel horrible. So sometimes you're feeling stressed out, someone might light a candle and it makes them feel good, or they'll spray a perfume, or your house smells, a bit musty. So you open the windows for air to come in, you put in some air freshener or something like that. And even, fragrance is linked to smell. Sometimes just the smell of
Mhm.
your child or
Yeah.
someone that you really care about, you smell them and you feel good, or you smell their clothing, and it makes you feel a certain way. So I was just looking at the connection between what you smell and
Mhm.
what goes on in your brain or your mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
was doing it through physical products.
Yeah. So, wow. Okay, the moment we've been waiting for, but if you've joined us and you haven't subscribed to this channel and you're enjoying this conversation, please subscribe to the channel. If you're already subscribed, thank you. Thank you. And I see the chat. I'm looking at the chat. If you see me looking here, we love you. Great network. When you know who you know matters, and who knows you matters too. Okay, we love Jacob too. Yes, we do. So there are comments coming in. Just place my order. I can't wait to try. Very, very
Thank
good.
you. Thank you.
Okay. So you built this beautiful. I like Akiba. What does Akiba mean, by the way? Is
All
that
right, Akiba. Yeah, Akiba is an interesting story. When I was trying to find a name for the business,
mm-hmm.
I was thinking of a whole lot of things. Akiba is an acronym.
Okay.
Yeah, it's my name, my mother's name, and my father's name. So
Okay.
when I was trying to find something, so that was one of the, um, routes that I went along. So I looked playing around with letters from their name. So I'm Abba.
Eh?
So that's ABA. My
Mm-hmm.
mother was Aku. Aku is the name for a woman born on Wednesday
Wednesday.
from the tribe that my mother comes from, which is the Eves in Ghana. So she was Aku. My father was Kofi. That's a male born on Friday from the Fanti ethnic group in Ghana. So the Kofi, I took it as the K and the I. Aku was the A and the K, and then Abba is the ABA. So I started playing around and I got Akiba. It sounded good. I said, I'm going to go with it. Then I realized that Akiba sounds familiar. It sounds familiar. I said, of course, in Swahili,
Mm-hmm.
Akiba is to save. And when I was with
Mm-hmm.
Care International in Tanzania, we had a program called Ongeza Akiba, we can save. It was one of our microfinance projects. And I said, oh, yes, even what it actually means is a good thing. So that's where Akiba came from. It's an acronym taken from the names of myself and my
Yeah.
parents. Mhm.
Akiba Fragrance and Wellness Studio.
Yes.
Akiba Fragrance and Wellness Studio has been built. You've built this business around fragrance products, and then life surprised you. Big surprise. You lost your sense of smell. Well, take us to that moment, or the season, the time. What was the experience like?
Mm.
And everyone listening, just imagine you've lost your sense of smell. Ah, and meanwhile, you are working with fragrance.
You're working
Please,
with
please
fragrance.
take us on this journey. Take
All
us
right.
which year it was, what it was, and yeah, where you are right now. Just take
Okay.
us along,
All
please.
right. Happy to do so. This was in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
So there was before COVID. Right now, when you talk about smell loss, people think of the pandemic, but this was 2017. So that was like 3 years before COVID. I'd gone to New York for a meeting. And then on my way back, I was at a train station waiting to catch the train back home. And there was this lady behind me who was, I think she had a bad cold. She was coughing and sneezing and that kind of thing. I was like, that sounds really bad. It looks like she's really got a bad cough or cold or something. And I remember that, very clearly in my mind. I didn't make much of it at the time. I just said, let me move away. So I moved away. I got home, everything was fine. And then I got a cold, really, really bad. really bad cold, and it lasted for a while. I think it was more than a cold, but at that time I just thought it was a cold. Yes, and we all get cold, so we don't worry. So there was the day I was in the kitchen. I wrote the date down. It was April 26th
Oh, wow.
of 2017.
Okay.
And I was in the kitchen and I was making soup. And for those in the audience who are familiar with how Ghanaians cook, meals are not soft in terms of the smell or the aroma.
The aroma.
Very strong, so you have onion in there, you have ginger, you have garlic, you have pepper, you have your meat. So I was at the stove and I was cooking, and then all of a sudden, I was like, I can't smell what I'm cooking. Why can't I smell what I'm cooking? Yeah. And I stopped. I was like, I can't smell, I can't smell. I don't know when my sense of smell kind of went, but it was that moment, April 26, 2017, cooking light soup, that's what we call it, that I realized that I couldn't smell. So it was fine. I have a cold. It'll probably get better within a week or so. So initially, I wasn't bothered. But then, a week passed, still no change. 2 weeks passed, still no change. A month passed, no change. Yes, I couldn't smell for 3 months.
Wow.
Yes. So somewhere along the line, I started getting worried, because one, it meant I was not well. There was something really wrong with me. And then how was I going to work? I can't smell the things that I work with. Uh-huh. I don't know why it didn't occur to me to even do a search online or to go to the hospital or anything. I think maybe I was just hopeful that it would
Yeah.
come back. So this was, as I said, it was in April. I'd lost my sense of smell for 3 months. And in May of that year, I had a program to attend, and I was going to go with my products to sell. And the question was, are you going to do this or not? Because you can't smell the things. How are you going to make them? So I had a decision to make. And I decided that I was going to go because for every product I made, I had the formulation, I had the formula written down. Yeah. So I could pick the things. And once I stuck with it, I knew what the outcome would be. But the thing was, if I mix things up, I may not be able to distinguish by smell. So I had to be very careful where I put what. It just happened that at the time, a dear friend of mine was visiting. She unfortunately passed away, but some in the audience might know her. Her name was Oriana. So she had come to visit. So I told her, Ori, you're going to have to help me to do the smell check and make sure things are in the right place. So that's what I did. And we went for the show. She was here. So she came with me and she helped me. So we're able to do it. So I said, well, then that's what I have to do. I just stick to what I already know.
Yeah.
But it means I can't make anything
Yeah.
new because I can't smell. And then I said, okay, what's the worst that can happen? Okay, I'll start making things that don't have a smell. I just have to change and do products that you don't have to put fragrance in. That was kind of what I thought at the time. But then there was a day I walked into my studio and then suddenly I could smell something. I didn't know what it was. I was like, oh, I can smell. It's like it was gone and then it was back. Of course, I was excited that my sense of smell had come back. But then I realized over time that it was distorted. So things didn't smell the way they should. You take something like coffee. The coffee didn't smell like coffee. For me, coffee smelled like, peanuts, and initially I thought the coffee in our house had gone bad because when we would go out and I'd pass a coffee shop, I could smell coffee the normal. So I said, probably something wrong with the coffee in the house. But over time, even at the coffee shops, the coffee smelled off. Then I noticed that what do you call it? Scented products, like perfume, body lotion, and stuff, smelled horrible. Marian, it's a smell I couldn't describe because it's something I hadn't smelled before. But I know that that's not how those things were supposed to
Yeah.
smell. Yeah. So that lasted for 3 years, and yes, so that's when, I was really in trouble. because
Oh.
there were so many things I couldn't stand the smell of. Certain foods smelled awful. But looking back, I think I was fortunate. I think I had a mild form of that distortion, so somehow I was able to get by. But some of the fragrance compounds I used to work with, they smelled off. Something like peppermint smell terrible. Some other thing, it's a pungent smell. It will just knock you in the face and you have to put the thing down, So I mean, in summary, it wasn't really much fun, at the time. Um, Over the 3 years, it gradually got better. Things started coming back. Things started coming back. I mean, there's something I'm going to say. Um, it might be considered maybe TMI, but it's a reality of people who have this
Yeah.
condition. Things that smell pleasant to regular people smell offensive to you, and things that smell offensive to regular people actually smell pleasant to you. Yes.
Mm.
So if you go into a public bathroom, which is actually smelling bad, you just coast through it as if nothing is happening because rather you smell something pleasant.
Wow.
It's like things turned upside down. So the things that should smell good smell bad. The things that should smell bad smell good. It's a very isolating experience to go through because people around you do not understand. If you haven't experienced it, you can't even begin to imagine what it's like. Some people will say, I'd rather not have a sense of smell than have a distorted sense of smell. Yeah, so that was the experience. I was still able to get by making products, but I couldn't do any new product development. There were some ingredients that I couldn't use because they smelled pretty bad. And at the time it was happening, um, there was a part of me that felt this must be for something, but at the time I didn't know what. I just had my problem and was trying to deal with it.
So you had two things. You lost your
I
sense of
lost my
smell
sense
for
of
three
smell for
months,
3 months,
and then you had distorted smell
for
for 3
3 years.
years.
Yes.
So you have taught me that one is anosmia
And
and
the
the other
other,
is parosmia.
Parosmia. Yes.
And then eventually you gained your smell back.
Yes.
So many people don't realize how much our sense of smell affects everyday life, right? There are lots of people. Talk to us about people who live with this condition of anosmia and
And
parosmia.
Parosmia.
How does
Yeah.
it affect their quality of life? And then you can go into how it reinvented your
Okay.
mission.
All right. Yes. So, like we said, loss of sense of smell, it can be partial or it can be complete. So some people they'll realize that it's not as strong as it used to be, or there are certain things they can't smell and they can smell others. So you can have partial anosmia and then you can have complete anosmia where you don't smell anything. Now, anosmia can be acquired, which means you're not born that way. You're born with a normal sense of smell, and then something happens and you lose it. Usually, it's maybe you have some kind of upper respiratory problem, or some people it's an injury to your head. So they talk about traumatic brain injury can also cause you to lose your sense of smell. It can be due to maybe there's something growing in your nasal passageway. There are different reasons why you lose your sense of smell. Some people are born that way. So they are born without a sense of smell. So they've never smelled anything in their life. So that's anosmia. And then parosmia is when your sense of smell is distorted. Like I said, things don't smell right. There's a third condition called phantosmia. Phantosmia, like phantom, phantosmia.
Mm-hmm.
Phantosmia is when you smell things that are not there, and I,
Um,
I I also had phantosmia for about a week or so. So what happened was between my getting anosmia and parosmia, there was phantosmia in between. And with the phantosmia, what happened was I would smell oranges, a strong smell of fresh oranges, but there were no oranges around me, and that happened for about a week. At that point, I thought there was something going on with my brain, but that's also a condition that people have. So they smell things that are not there.
Wow.
Yeah, in parosmia, there's actually something you're smelling just doesn't smell
Mm,
right. Yeah. Now, I
mm,
said it's very isolating. I want to share something that I wrote just to read. Um, when I first lost my sense of smell, I found a lady. Her name is Girl Who Can't Smell, and she had a social media. She was on Facebook and Instagram, and I connected with her, and she invited me to share my story. So I'd written my story. I think I first wrote it in 2018. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I want to read a section of it.
sure.
And then when COVID hit and people were losing their sense of smell, I updated the story. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll read the last two paragraphs. It said, as a result of my experience, the concept of fragrance and wellness took on a new meaning for me. My line of work was based on the concept of using scent to provide pleasure, relaxation, stress relief, and that kind of thing, albeit for people with a normal sense of smell. Having experienced anosmia and parosmia, I now appreciated the more fundamental role that scent played in our well-being, the connection between the ability or inability to smell and our hygiene, safety, memory, nutrition, relationships, mental health, and overall joy of life. At that time, I felt that I should incorporate this new understanding into my work, but I was not sure how to. All right. Now, COVID hits, and I updated that story. And I said, then COVID-19 happened with the accompanying misery of anosmia, phantosmia, and parosmia. I have read countless stories of confusion, depression, despair, fear, agony, isolation, and cries for help for people suffering from COVID-related smell loss and smell distortion. For some people, parosmia in particular is an ongoing assault on their senses 24/7, and the thought that this condition could last not just for months but for years is a terrifying one. I feel the pain that people with parosmia are going through, and I want to offer some help through my work. Okay, so that, at the time when COVID hit, and I realized people were losing their sense of smell, and then people were also getting parosmia, I was like, oh, now I know what all this was about. This happened to me 3 years ago, and now it's exploded. So I wanted to connect with that community. I started a page on Instagram. It was called Smells You Remember, and I was posting things to do with smell loss, etc. And a few people reached out, and most people, it was panic. I lost my sense of smell now. Things are smelling horrible. I can't eat. Will this ever end? And then I'm like, I had it. It took a long time, but it got better. That, you know, bit of hope that this is not a permanent condition
Mm-hmm.
was really life-giving for people.
Mm-hmm.
So this just gives you a window into that condition, someone living with that condition. Some people, it even becomes life-threatening because they can't eat anything at all.
Oh
There
my
were people
goodness.
who had to go on feeding tubes because that's the only way they could get food into their system. They lose a lot of weight. You can't eat. And the funny thing is, the things you can eat are sweets, candy, cakes, biscuits. Those are the things. So those who at least could keep something down now started putting a lot of weight on. And those who couldn't eat at all started losing a lot of weight. But just the fact that a sense that we take for granted.
Yeah.
I mean, who thinks about you smell. People think, oh no, if I lose my eyesight, oh, that would be terrible. If I can't hear, that will be terrible. If I can't smell, no big deal. But when you lose it, you realize how important your sense of smell is in connecting you even to the world around you. You know, everybody, when you go out and you come back, you feel a certain sense of relief and comfort. Oh, I'm home. One of the things that makes your home feel home is the way it smells, but you might not think about it. When you go into another person's home, you notice how it smells. Everybody's home has a certain smell. When you come back into your surroundings, it's part of what makes you feel good. When you hug your family, your children. People say, oh, I love the smell of babies. Oh, I love my husband's perfume. I love my grandmother's perfume. Those smells make a connection between you and the outside world, and they ground you. When it's gone, a certain part of you is gone. Yes, but sometimes it takes losing it for an extended period to appreciate it. So that's the life of someone who is living without a sense of smell when they used to be able to smell, and then someone who can now smell, but everything smells rotten. How do you live life like that? It's not a good place to be.
You also said you can be born with it.
Yes, you can be born with it. Let me talk about that a bit. So some people are born with it. From the stories I've read, the children are born with it, so they don't know that there's something else. So it's like when you can be at school and there's an experiment going on, and you realize your friends are saying things that you can't appreciate. Sometimes it's at that point that they realize that there's something missing. But there are a lot of people who, for a long time, they don't even know that something is wrong because that's the way they were born. And they are for the longest time, smell wasn't something that is tested for when you go to the hospital and you're doing a physical. They don't check your sense of smell. They check other things, but they do check your sides. They might check your hearing, but they don't check. So for a lot of people who were born with it, it may go undetected for a long time. But they kind of find a way of surviving because that's how they were born with it. So it has its own challenges. But if you could smell and you lose it, it's more noticeable. Now, I talked about not being able to smell this or that, but you have food that burns. And it happened to me. I would burn food because I couldn't smell it. If food has gone bad, you can't smell it. Sometimes food is gone bad, but it looks good.
Yes.
The smell that will tell you it's off. So imagine you can get food poisoning. There's a gas leak in your house. You can't smell it. There's something burning. So there's also the safety and security aspect of not being able to smell properly.
Oh, okay. Anosmia, parosmia, and
Phantosmia.
Phantosmia. My goodness. The things we take for granted
Mhm.
now. And yours was also complicated by the fact that you are making fragrance products. There's a question here, and if you have any question I have to move it here to see. The question is, are there any proven or promising methods? Then there's another, so these two questions. Can one retrain one's brain to restore one's sense of smell?
Okay. Let me take the first question said, are there any proven methods for
Or promising methods, I guess, to treat anosmia, parosmia, and phantosmia?
The before COVID, there wasn't much attention given to the sense of smell, but post-COVID, there's more attention. So there are some trials going on. There's some research going on treatments that can be given. I don't think there is a universal treatment that is available at the moment from what I've read, but it all depends on what is the cause of the loss of the sense of smell. So if it's an obstruction in your nose or somewhere up here, and that obstruction can be removed. For some people, some people say they have a polyp or some growth. Once it's removed, then you are fine. If it's due to getting the flu or a cold, then you cure the cold, you are fine. Some people, like I said, it's a traumatic brain injury that becomes a bit more complicated. There is some connection between your nose and your brain, and for some people, that connection, maybe due to an accident, was severed, it was cut. And for some people, it's like, well, there's no known way right now to reconnect. So for some people, unfortunately, it looks like that's what their life is going to be. But for others, and I said because of COVID and the increased research, there are different methods that people are trying. Some of them are supplements that people have taken and it has helped. What happens is with some of the loss of smell, it's the what's the name that they call it? Right now, the name has gone, when I'm trying to remember it, but there's a damage to
The pathway, the
yes,
nasal
there's
pathway.
damage to the pathway, yes. And for some of them, taking those supplements can help to restore or regenerate.
Mm.
And so then that's what, works for them. The second question is kind of linked to one of the methods, that's the retraining,
For the brain.
because with the parosmia, it's actually supposed to be a sign that your smell system is repairing. So
Mm.
when you smell something, there's a signal that is sent from the aroma molecules to your brain, and your brain interprets it as a smell. So you smell aroma molecules from oranges, it gets to your brain, the brain deciphers this is the smell of orange. When you lose your sense of smell for some time, if something gets damaged, like it was with COVID, during the process of repair, it's like the communication gets mixed up.
Yeah, the
So
signals.
yes,
Yeah.
the signals, yes. So the a certain message is sent, but the brain hears something else.
Yeah.
So that process, there's the process that is called smell training,
Mm.
which has worked for many people, but it hasn't worked for everyone.
Mm.
So that's one of the things with the nose and the sense of smell. There are certain things that we don't know, but yes, you can retrain your brain to smell correctly again using this process called smell training. It's a slow process. You have to, be diligent over time. It involves smelling. Usually they use 4 scents. You smell them every day and you try to, you try to connect.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
it's almost like they said, smell training is like the gym for your nose.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the first time you might not smell anything. The second time, you might not smell anything, but over time you find that you are beginning to identify things again. So there is a way of training, but it hasn't worked for everyone. And
Mm.
then there's another uh, method that I think it's a doctor in California also is trying, where they take your blood and they make some extracts. They take, is it platelets from your blood, and they inject them up your nose. So they take something from your own system and inject them up your nose, and they found some success for some patients. So I'll say that there are different things that those in the medical field are trying now that the sense of smell has, got more attention because of COVID. But people who are suffering will tell you it's too slow and it's not enough
Mm.
because when you're suffering like that, you want relief quickly.
Yeah. And especially if you had a sense of smell before.
Before, yes.
Yeah. So here is my chemist who has migrated, has done lotion bars, riding high, 2016, set up Akiba Fragrance and Wellness Studio. And 2017, like a year,
Mhm.
has been hit by this for 3 years. How many years did it last? Like three
Yeah,
years with
three
the
three years, yes.
Parosmia.
Mhm.
So, and of course, your business focused on scented products.
Mhm.
So, how did that change things for you? Your focus and reshape the mission
What
behind
I
your
do.
work.
Yeah. Um, like I said, I was fortunate in that my sense of smell came back.
Yes.
I had parosmia for 3 years. I kind of managed, and then it pretty much came back to normal. Now, I describe myself as having a normal sense of smell, but there's a little bit of it which isn't quite what it used to be. So every now and then I'll smell something. There are some perfumes I can't use because they still kind of have that funny smell, but I can use almost everything. Right. Now, like I said, when COVID hit and I realized that, okay, there are lots more people suffering like I used to at the time. Um, and then I felt like that experience has to matter for something. I wanted to offer something to people who were suffering. And so I said, well, I'll do it through my products. So instead of just making these same products, just looking at the fragrance, let's use the best fragrance that will make you feel good. I decided that I will, gradually transition and then make products that people who are suffering from a smell distortion can use. Now, something that came up during that period was that there were certain scents that people who have a smell distortion can tolerate. Uh-huh. And one of them was the smell of vanilla, the smell of coconut, the smell of cinnamon. There are some scents that do not trigger that awful smell. I don't know why it is, but that's what it was. So initially, I was thinking that, okay, let me make things that are scented like vanilla, cinnamon, coconut, etc. At the time, I was making candles, so I made my candles vanilla, coconut, cinnamon. So yeah, so people could use. So the thing was, instead of using lavender, rose, and the kind, I'll just stick to vanilla, coconut, and cinnamon. So that's kind of what I started. But with the body care stuff that people were going to put on their skin, I decided that, look, let me just go fragrance free. Let me just take the fragrance out so that you don't have any chance of getting that reaction. We're just going to take the fragrance out altogether because someone who has very severe parosmia, and doesn't now have the time to spend money trying this product and trying that product to see if it will work and wasting money. Let's just give you something that just doesn't have any fragrance. At least you use that over time, maybe you can figure your way out. So that's when I stopped making scented products and then just started making products that don't have any fragrance. Now, when you say it doesn't have any fragrance, it doesn't mean it doesn't have a smell. It just means you're not putting a fragrance oil in it. You're not putting an essential oil in it.
Okay.
You're just using the ingredients. So if it's shea butter, mango butter, olive oil, it'll have a smell, but just the smell of the natural ingredients.
Okay.
And when I had parosmia, I realized that things that were natural actually smell tolerable. So if I used to use African black soap during that time, that did not smell horrible to me, and I also used Dove, the Dove regular, which wasn't scented, and then somewhere along the line, I realized that there was a perfume I had that I could use, and it was a natural perfume. So the signs were kind of like the more natural the product is, the more tolerable it would be. So that's where I made the shift. Then I found out that it's not only people who have parosmia who have a problem with fragrance.
Okay, Abba, hold on.
Okay.
So all your body butters are fragrance free. You shifted completely. This is a complete turnaround.
Complete.
Wow.
I don't put in any fragrance oil. I don't put in even essential oils. I don't put, and I'll explain why I don't put essential oils shortly.
Okay.
Yes.
Before you continue, some people have joined. I see the numbers have gone up.
Okay.
Can you tell them the name of your business so we don't forget?
All right. It's Akiba Fragrance and Wellness Studio. You can find us by that name, on online. That's our shop. I'm also on Facebook by the same name, Akiba Fragrance and Wellness Studio. I'm also on Instagram, but Instagram, I recently changed it. So it's Akiba Care. Akiba Care. So Akiba.care. Akiba Care. That's on Instagram.
And Akiba is Akiba.
Yes. Yes.
Akiba Fragrance.
And
is it still
wellness.
Akiba Fragrance and
It's
Wellness?
still Akiba Fragrance and Wellness Studio, which is confusing sometimes because it's fragrance and wellness. Then you come to me and I say, oh, the products are fragrance free, but there's a story behind it. And
Yes.
that's how the company was registered. So
Yes.
I kind of now have to think whether I should go to a doing business as name or to keep it as is. I haven't figured that out, but it's Akiba Fragrance and Wellness. And the reality also is that it's our body care, the things that you put on your skin that do not have any fragrance in them.
Yeah.
But our home care products at the moment, we just have the scented ornaments, which I showed earlier. I've paused my candles for now because I'm thinking of shifting also to candles that don't have fragrance, to have that to be my main thing. I'm thinking of doing beeswax. Beeswax has a natural, pleasant aroma of the beeswax. So that's something I'm thinking of doing. So right now on the website, you won't find candles. It's the scented closet ornaments, which are actually very popular, that we have there. And for those, I'm also looking to, I have some scents there that are good, but when I add more, it'll be scents that are mild.
Okay.
Yeah, because there are some people who have a sensitivity to fragrance, but they still
Yes.
like to use fragrance if it's very soft,
Yeah.
so to have that as well.
Yeah, you were telling a story about fragrance. Even people that don't have parosmia and
That's
anosmia
right.
have
Yes.
another aspect.
Um,
Yeah.
yes. So people have a distorted sense of smell, may not be able to handle fragrance, but I found out that there's also a community of people who are fragrance sensitive, not because of smell
Parosmia.
distortion, but they are fragrance sensitive for other reasons. Some people, fragrance perfumes gives them breathing problems. Some people, it triggers their asthma. Some people, if it goes on their skin, it triggers a rash. There's so many reactions to fragrance. So there's some people who just need products that do not have no fragrance oil. Fragrance oil usually are man-made fragrance compounds. And then you have the essential oils, which come from plants. Yeah, so there's a group of people, it's even bigger than the group of people who have parosmia, who are fragrance sensitive. Yeah, so I expanded my focus, to look not just at people who have parosmia, but people who have fragrance sensitivity in general. So that's kind of, the major shift that took place, where I'm now a brand that provides, body care products for people who have sensitivity to fragrance and people who have sensitive skin. Usually there's an overlap between the two. So in the selection of our ingredients, we look for things that have a mild smell. There are things that have a natural smell, and that natural smell is not good. It doesn't smell nice. So it's not enough that it's natural.
Natural.
It has to have a natural smell that is,
Pleasant.
pleasant. Pleasant, not in the sense that it's fragrant, but it's just something that is mild and, tolerable. If you've ever smelled neem oil, you don't want to go around smelling like neem oil, so there are some of the natural products that have a strong smell. They are not fragrance products, they are not essential oils, but they have a strong smell, which even regular people do not appreciate. Yeah. So in our selection, we want something that is a natural ingredient, but then it also has a smell that you can tolerate, a smell that is not off-putting.
Wow. So what looked like a limitation actually expanded your mission. Really?
Yes.
This is huge.
Yes.
There is a question. How different are unscented products from fragrance-free in terms of their effect on parosmia? Thank you, Sado.
Okay. With let me distinguish between fragrance-free and unscented. Fragrance-free means there was no ingredient added to it, to the product, to impart a scent. Okay, and usually to impart the scent, you put a fragrance oil or you put an essential oil. Or so with fragrance-free, it means you did not add anything to it for the purpose of imparting a scent to your product. But the product will have the smell of the natural ingredients. Okay. If you make a product with shea butter, pure shea butter, no essential oil, no fragrance oil, it's a fragrance-free product, but you will smell the shea butter. You have the smell of shea butter. Yeah. If you're someone who has parosmia, very severe parosmia, and you can't stand even the smell of shea butter, then that product, even though it's called fragrance-free, is not going to work for you
Okay.
because even that natural smell you can't
Yeah.
stand. So maybe for someone with severe parosmia, they want something that smells like nothing, no smell. And in that case, you want to go for something that is labeled unscented. Unscented in the industry, the technical term is supposed to be that it doesn't have a smell. I mean, the reality is that everything kind of has a smell, but unscented means it doesn't have a smell. Oh, so if you have parosmia, severe parosmia, you may want to choose an unscented product. But in the formulation, unscented products may include fragrance. They add the fragrance to mask the smell of the natural ingredients. So the irony is that if you have a fragrance-free product, it could have a smell. If you have an unscented product, it could have fragrance in it. So it depends on where you're coming from. If you have parosmia and you just don't want to smell anything, an unscented product is good for you. If you have parosmia and you have a sensitivity to fragrance in the sense that you react, you get a rash, or you have breathing problems, then you have to be careful in your choice of unscented because they may include a fragrance ingredient in there.
Wow. Now I'm hearing the science, the scientists speaking, the chemists, and all the formulation. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. As we begin to wrap up, I mean, I just can't, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around your story. Immigrant scientist, scientist, immigrant, whichever. You come, you start the business, starts 2016, start a business, 2017, you lose your sense of smell. Isn't that something? Oh my goodness, life has a way of sometimes disrupting us, right? So I want you to speak to that person who may be facing an unexpected disruption in their life or career. They've come to America as an immigrant, doing when there's a sudden disruption, unexpected disruption. I want you to speak to that person. What you've learned about turning your disruption into direction, expanding your mission. Just speak a word of encouragement, some advice to that person.
Yeah. First, everybody's situation is different. The nature of the disruption also differs from person to person. And even though it may be unexpected, what happens as a result of it will, as someone will say, it depends. So the way I see it, the disruption is something that kind of blocks you in your path. It's like you're going somewhere and something crosses your path. So that it makes you stop and you can either hop over it and continue on your way. It depends on, there's some disruptions you can just hop over and, move on. There's some that will make you have to, you go around it and then you continue. There's some that kind of make you have to go forward at an angle. And there's some that will make you have to turn around and go in the opposite direction. So it'll all depend on what the disruption you're facing is. But what I'll say is that no matter what it is, I think that you are not helpless. Yes, you are not helpless. There's always something that you can do. Maybe you can't change that situation. Let's say you unexpectedly lost your job. That's a big disruption, especially in these times, or you were living in, let's say, Ghana, and you come to the US, you thought you were going to be able to find a job to do, and you've applied for several things and nothing has gone through. That's, a disruption. And like I said, you are not helpless. There's always something you can do. And I would say, take time and look for those things that you can do, and do something. Don't say, okay, I came to the US, I can't find a job, I'm just going to be there. The education that you've had, the experiences that you've had, I believe that you can turn it into something. So what I want to say is that, one, you are not helpless. There is something that you can do. We talked about community. Ask for help. Yes, I think all of us have friends, or we have relatives, or we have people who we can trust. Ask for help. Maybe through speaking to others, you will have some idea of what you could do, and just start. Just start with something. I think that, a disruption doesn't mean you have to give up on what you used to do. So maybe before you came to the US, you were a career person, or you were in a particular profession. You might meet a disruption just by coming here because the system is different. For some people, it will mean doing something else. Some people have to change their careers because you still have to put food on the table. You have to pay your bills. You have to satisfy. We all want our lives to mean something. So you still need to satisfy that need. And sometimes it'll actually mean I need to change and do something different. And we have to be open to that. We have to be open to change. We have to be flexible. But it's difficult to prescribe something in particular. Yeah. So what I'll say is the fact that you're not helpless, there's something that you can do. Ask for help, and I think it was last week or so, I was reading something on the Bible app, and there's a verse that I know I've seen before, but I don't think I've paid attention to it like it hit me that day. And I'd just like to read it.
Sure.
It's really about the fact that no matter what, something that doesn't change is that God loves us and He's with us, no matter what we are going through. And this was from Psalm 143, verse 8. And it reads, "Let the morning bring me word of your unfailing love, for I have put my trust in you. Show me the way I should go, for to you I entrust my life." And when I read it that day, I was like, this is wonderful. I mean, it's a wonderful way to start the day, because at the beginning of the day, it's, "Let the morning bring me word of your unfailing love." God's love is unfailing. And if every morning we are asking Him, remind us of that, I've come to this country, this is what I thought it was going to be, things are not going my way. But every morning we are asking God to remind us that He loves us, for we have put our trust in Him. And then we ask Him, show me the way I should go, for to you I entrust my life. So again, you are here, there's this, whatever it is going on, we are asking God, show me the way, remind me of your love and show me the way every day. Remind me of your love and show me the way. And, I believe that little by little, you encourage yourself and you walk along the step that's going to take you either to continue to, go off at an angle, or maybe He'll say, let's make a turn around and go in a totally different direction. So that's what
Oh, thank you, Abba. Thank you. I hope you got something, a lot out of this conversation. If one of you know Parosmia, anosmia, Phantosmia,
Phantosmia.
Phantosmia. Yeah, and I am so impressed by your mission, how it's expanded to take care of, you know, people that we don't even know of, or think that, we take things for granted. And your mission is now covering those without a sense of smell distorted, those who have fragrance issues. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much. And I see people are showing you love in the chat. Let the morning bring me word of your unfailing love. show me the way I should go for it to, yeah, and I trust my life. A
Yes.
disruption does not mean giving up. It could be an opportunity to pivot and embrace innovation.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that has happened to you. And so, Abba, thank you for sharing your story with us. And thank you to everyone who joined us for this breaking through conversation.
I'd like to
Okay, go
just
ahead.
start.
So if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, share this conversation with someone who may need encouragement for their journey. Sometimes the disruption we fear becomes a doorway to something greater. The question is, how do you respond when that happens? Abba, I'll give you the last word.
Yes, I just wanted to say a word to, we talked about community,
Yes.
and then there's also, the community that's closest to you is the family. So I mentioned that I'm here with my husband. I mentioned I'm running a business. It's a one-woman business. Once in a while, I've had to bring people in to help. But I call my husband my employee no pay, because
For now.
have an order. Yes, he helps me. He helps me with certain aspects of the work. And then there are my siblings, who are my, cheerleaders, in the background. There's my brother KK, my sister Araba, another sister AC, and then my youngest brother Echo, who have been my supports also along with their families. And then I have my girlfriends. I mean, there are too many to mention here, so I don't want to mention one and leave someone out. But all my, girlfriends, other people who know about what I'm doing and have supported me in different ways, I want to acknowledge them and express my gratitude.
Cool. Can we just give a virtual applause? Abba, Abba, Abba. If you Abba say, there's anyone, for those of us who went to high school in Ghana with a Abba Williams, CEO, founder, chief creative officers, chief formulator, chief chemist at Akiba Fragrance and Wellness Studio. Abba, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And until next time, keep breaking through. We are cheering you on. Thank you for joining us today. And for the story, thanks for sharing, Abba.
You're welcome.